harvest written in dust, it is said that in the hour when dusk first settles over the bones of forgotten kingdoms, a single question drifts through the cooling air like a wandering spirit. What vanished crop once bent the fate of an empire? No chronicle speaks its name. No memory holds its shape. Yet something stirs beneath the silence, like a breath rising from old earth, reminding us that history is not only what survives, it is also what refuses to fully disappear. Tonight, we begin at the edge of abandoned terraces carved into the skin of a long-sleeping mountain. Their stone steps, worn smooth by centuries of quiet winds, glow faintly beneath the last streaks of fading light. The landscape seems to breathe in slow, ancient rhythms, an inhalation of dust, an exhalation of forgotten seasons. Beneath your feet, the soil crumbles softly, as though every grain remembers a ritual once repeated across lifetimes. Whispers tell us that these terraces once shimmered with life, fields that unfurled like soft gold, rows of green that stirred in the breath of dawn, a harvest that anchored calendars, guided ceremonies, and perhaps shaped the very myths of the people who lived here. But now the terraces lie empty, surrendered to silence. Only the stones remain, and the patient dust that waits for someone to ask the right question. As you step deeper into this ancient amphitheater of earth, a faint echo stirs gentle, tender. It is not a sound, but a memory brushed across the edge of awareness. In that half-imagined space, you begin to see them, farmers moving with reverence through these long-forgotten fields, their hands weathered but purposeful, their steps soft upon the earth, their rituals carried out beneath moons marked with sacred symbols. The echoes are not loud. They do not insist. They arrive like distant lanterns glimpsed through fog, suggesting a life lived, a rhythm followed, a story almost told. It is said that the crop they nurtured was unlike any that survives today. Some believe its grains glowed like dusklight when held up to the sun. Others claim its fragrance lingered on the wind like the soft sweetness of a childhood memory. More mystical voices suggest it held spiritual significance, used to bless the sick, feed the hungry, calm the restless, perhaps even guide souls across unseen thresholds. But of its true form, nothing remains. Not a seed, not a root, not a trace that science can hold. All that survives are hints scattered across century scratches on pottery depicting spiraled stalks, ghost pollen embedded in the corners of clay jars, fragments of song describing a harvest written in dust. Such remnants do not reveal the truth. They only deepen the mystery. Now, as night folds itself gently around the terraces, we follow the soft pathways etched by time. The air cools. The light fades into muted blues and shadowed golds. And beneath the silence, the earth seems to hum an old, old melody, so faint it might be nothing more than imagination. Where memory fades, mythology begins. Some ancient storytellers spoke of a season when the harvest failed not slowly, but all at once, as though erased by an unseen hand. They say the leaves browned overnight, the stalks collapsed into themselves, and the soil turned strangely hollow. Others offer a different story, that the people themselves abandoned the crop after a celestial omen appeared in the sky, a star marked like a spiraled flame. These contradictions live side by side, refusing to resolve, like two reflections cast onto the same pool of water. And so, we wander deeper into the terraces, allowing uncertainty to become our guide. In the fading light, your eyes drift across stones carved with spirals, some barely visible beneath moss, others preserved in eerie clarity, as if waiting for someone to notice. Spirals, always spirals, coiled like shells, like storms, like the unfolding of time itself. Perhaps they marked the shape of the vanished crop. Perhaps they represented the cycles of the moon, beneath whose glow the farmers once sang their seasonal rites. A gentle breeze sweeps across the terraces, lifting the scent of dry earth. It carries with it a feeling, a soft, almost nostalgic ache, as though the land remembers something it longs to share, yet cannot fully express. Beneath the silence, the past breathes. Some scholars claim that the terraces belonged to an empire whose name has dissolved into dust. Not conquered, not burned, not erased by war, simply faded, the way a dream dissolves upon waking. The disappearance of the crop may have played a role, a kingdom's fate turned by something small, delicate, woven into daily life so deeply that its absence unraveled everything. Others believe the crop was not destroyed at all, but transformed, perhaps evolving into something else, something we still plant and harvest today. If true, then history continues to hold its secret quietly, allowing the story to echo only when the world grows still enough to listen. And tonight, DARA, in this quiet world we are creating together, the echoes grow clearer. You arrive at the uppermost terrace, where an ancient stone basin rests beneath a canopy of twilight. Dust gathers inside it, yet the shape of the basin feels ceremonial, too intentional to be mere farmland. Some say offerings were placed here. Others think seeds were washed here before planting. And a few whisper that the final remnants of the lost crop were scattered to the wind from this very spot, letting the earth take back what was always hers. You lift your gaze. Above the terraces, the sky deepens to indigo, soft and immense. A faint shimmer appears, one early star, marked by the moon's rising glow. For a moment, the world feels suspended between past and present, between what is known and what will always remain just beyond reach. Perhaps the harvest did not disappear at all. Perhaps it simply slipped into myth, carried gently across time like a lullaby, resurfacing only when night invites the imagination to wander. It is said that some truths are too tender to survive the harsh daylight of certainty. They must be approached in whispers, in questions, in the slow breath of dusk. And so, This chapter draws toward its quiet close, not with revelation, but with reverence. The terraces remain empty and ancient, their stones kissed by moonlight. The earth waits, the mystery endures, and as you stand on the threshold between night and memory, one final thought lingers in the stillness. Sometimes the greatest turning points in history happen not with thunder, but with the disappearance of something small, sacred, and easily overlooked, leaving only a soft uncertainty resting on the night air. A harvest written in dust. A story written in silence. A memory waiting to be dreamt again. The moonlit granaries of a lost kingdom beneath the breath of a pale, wandering moon. There once stood a kingdom whose granaries gleamed like quiet ships anchored in a silver sea. They were said to be built not for harvest alone, but for memory, for holding the soft, fragile echo of a people who trusted the night more than the day. Travelers who approached them described an otherworldly hush, a kind of sacred listening that seemed to rise from the stones themselves, as if the walls still remembered every grain they once guarded. Tonight, DARA, we walk among them, not as researchers, nor as wanderers seeking discovery, but as dreamers moving gently through the dust of someone else's yesterdays. The moon rests low, a polished bowl of light. It casts long, pale paths across the earth, guiding us toward a place where time drifts slowly, almost shyly. The granaries stand in a crescent curve, their shapes softened by the passing centuries. No torches burn within them. No footsteps echo across their floors, and yet they do not feel abandoned. Instead, they resemble vast chambers of breath, waiting patiently for someone to remember their story. The people of this lost kingdom believed that grain was more than sustenance. It was a spirit, a fragile envoy from the earth, born of sunlit patience and moonlit blessing. They harvested under daylight, but they stored under starlight. For them, the night was a veil of protection, a quiet shield woven by ancient gods who whispered through shifting winds and murmuring sand. Some say their granaries were aligned to lunar cycles. Others claim they sang during certain nights of the year. A few more daring legends insist that the structures glowed faintly, gently, when the full moon rose above the distant hills. Perhaps none of these stories are real. Perhaps all of them are. Tonight, we simply listen. As we step closer, the air becomes cooler, tinged with the faint scent of old earth after rain. A doorway rises before us, tall, narrow, carved with patterns that resemble the slow curl of river currents. The stone is weathered, softened by centuries of moonlight, but the meaning beneath it remains intact. This was a place of offering, a place where farmers, priests, and weary travelers carried their grain with reverence, as if placing a heartbeat into the hands of a sleeping god. Inside the granary, the darkness is gentle, not oppressive, not heavy, just soft, like a folded blanket warmed by time. Our footsteps stir motes of dust that rise like floating memories. The architecture feels impossibly deliberate. Thin shafts of moonlight enter through slotted windows, creating pale ladders of illumination that descend from the ceiling to the floor. The beams shimmer on the walls, revealing faint shadows of baskets long emptied and wooden frames long fallen. There are no voices here, no tools, no signs of struggle or collapse. This kingdom did not fall in fire or thunder. It faded quietly like a candle burning out because the room itself forgot it needed light. Historians have speculated endlessly about what happened. A shift in the climate, a decline in trade, a silent migration toward greener lands. But among the few remaining folk tales, one story repeats itself with haunting consistency. The night the moon did not rise. According to the tale, the people gathered in their plazas, waiting for the first silver sliver to lift itself over the horizon. Instead, the sky remained dim, not dark, but empty. No moon, no glow, only a hollow vacancy that frightened even the oldest priests. For a civilization that shaped its structures around lunar breath, this absence was more than an astronomical oddity. It was a wound. In the weeks that followed, their granaries, once filled beyond measure, were said to have emptied with unnatural speed. Grain spoiled without reason. Containers cracked. The air thickened with unease. And soon, the people left in small, dispersed groups, each carrying whatever they could salvage. They walked into valleys, forests, and distant coasts, leaving behind structures that no longer felt blessed. The granaries stood silent afterward, their moonlit bones waiting for someone to return. Tonight, in this dreamlike hour, we stand in their place. A faint breeze moves through the chamber, brushing against our skin like the hush of an old hymn. It carries a whisper of grain husks, long vanished, but somehow still present an echo preserved in the stone's quiet memory. You can almost imagine the soft rustle of crops being poured into baskets, the murmured prayers spoken by hands that believed in the rhythm of night and the promise of harvest. Near the far wall lies an engraving, not a grand inscription, nothing heroic or royal or celebratory, just a single curling symbol surrounded by faint lines that resemble the rays of a half-hidden moon. Scholars have debated its meaning, calling it a calendar, an omen, a warning, a ceremonial mark. But standing here, in this gentle darkness, it feels simpler. It feels like devotion. A small, silent declaration. We were here. We listened to the night, and the night listened back. There is a profound comfort in that. Civilizations rise, flourish, and drift into dust, but their quietest rituals remain, not in books nor in monuments, but in places like this where silence feels sacred and the air remembers. We walk back toward the entrance. The moon has climbed higher, bathing the granary's threshold in a soft pearl glow. Outside, the structures stretch like calm guardians across the sleeping landscape, their shadows long and graceful. The stars shimmer above them, patient and eternal. As we step into the open night, one last breath of wind trails behind us, a farewell, perhaps, from a kingdom that once measured time by silver light. We leave with a gentle question resting in the quiet of our chest. If grain could carry memory, then what memories have we planted, knowingly or not, in the fields of our own lives? The granaries fade into the distance, but their hush remains a lingering promise that somewhere, under every moon the world has ever known, a fragment of their story continues to breathe. The seed that was never named there are stories, D-A-R-A, that begin not with kings or wars or monuments, but with something far smaller, so small it could rest unnoticed on the palm of your hand. Tonight, we drift into one such story. It belongs to a seed, a single quiet grain of life that once carried the breath of an entire civilization, yet whose name was lost before history could catch it. No scroll records it. No scribe saved it. And yet, its echo moves through the dust as softly as a whispered prayer. We begin at dusk, in a valley shaped like a sleeping crescent. Mountains rise on both sides, holding the last light of day upon their ridges. Below, the fields glow gold, then bronze, then finally a muted shadow as evening slips gently over the land. This was once the valley of the unnamed seed, though the people who lived here would have simply called it home. Legend says the seed grew only in moon-soaked soil, not in bright days, not in harsh summers, but under the soft breath of night. The farmers who tended it walked barefoot upon the earth so they could feel the pulse beneath their steps. They harvested with hands instead of tools, believing the seed was easily frightened by iron. When gathered, it smelled faintly of rain on warm stone, and when stored, it hummed or so the old stories claim like a soft lullaby carried on wind. Tonight, in this quiet hour, we follow an old path winding through abandoned terraces. The stones beneath our feet are worn smooth, as though thousands of calm steps still linger there in memory. There is no crop now, no hum, no breath. But there is an atmosphere, a gentle, waiting stillness, like a page left open long after its reader has gone to sleep. At the valley's center lies a circular clearing. Here the villagers once performed their planting ritual. They called it the evening offering. As the first star appeared, they would gather in silence, kneel in a wide circle, and place their palms flat upon the soil. They believed the earth woke gently at night, listening for the intentions of those who tended it. Only after this hush was complete would the seed be planted. From this ritual, the seed grew with unusual devotion. Its stalks shimmered silver under the moon, and even in the faintest breeze, They moved as if whispering to one another. In later myths, poets described the crop as the night teaching itself how to sing. But the mystery of this seed did not lie in its beauty. It lay in its temperament. For reasons lost to time, the seed resisted preservation. It could not be stored for long. It withered when removed from its valley. Attempts to grow it elsewhere produced only pale imitation stalks that rose, but did not glow, grains that formed, but did not hum. The seed seemed bound not just to soil, but to memory, to ritual, to the unrecorded breaths of a people who believed themselves its guardians. And then, one season it stopped growing altogether. No one knows why. Some say the moon shifted. Some say the valley's breath changed. Some say the silence of the offering was broken by grief after an old chief passed away. Whatever the reason, the seed simply refused to return. The farmers planted it as always, but mornings brought nothing. Nights remained still. The fields slept without waking. And though the people tried to coax it back, singing, praying, kneeling under star-flecked skies, the soil remained unchanged, cool and stubborn beneath their hands. In the years that followed, the valley emptied. The people drifted toward new lands, seeking crops that would not vanish with the moon. Their homes were left to the wind, their terraces to creeping vines, their rituals to fading recollection. The seed that had nourished them for centuries slipped quietly into legend. But legends, like old roots, rarely disappear completely. Tonight, under a crescent moon, as we stand in this clearing, there is a peculiar sensation, a hush that feels almost intentional, as if the valley remembers, as if the soil beneath our feet carries the faint outline of something once precious, not in its shape, but in its absence. Kneeling, you place your hand upon the ground. The soil is cool, soft, silent, yet not empty. There is a comfort in this touch, the kind that comes from acknowledging something that was once alive. You begin to imagine what it might have been like to plant a seed with such reverence, to treat agriculture not as industry, but as communion, to measure time not by calendars, but by breath, by ritual, by the rhythm of the night itself. The seed may be gone, but the sense of intimacy remains, the feeling that life, at its smallest scale, can carry entire worlds in its quiet pulse. As the moon climbs higher, its light spills across the terraces. The broken stone walls cast soft, slanted shadows. For a moment, the valley looks almost alive again, as if memory itself is stepping forward to greet us. Could the seed still exist, buried somewhere under centuries of dust? Could a fragment of it still cling to the soil, waiting for the right hands to wake it? Or was its disappearance the valley's final act of devotion, a reminder that not all gifts are meant to be preserved, cataloged, or named? The night does not answer, but it offers a gentle breath of wind, a sigh that brushes across the clearing. It feels like a farewell, or perhaps an invitation to remember. We rise slowly, leaving the valley with the same quiet the farmers once carried in their hearts. The terraces fade behind us, their curves blending with moonlit stone. The mountains hold their silence, ancient and patient. And the seed unnamed, unpreserved lingers only as a whisper. Some mysteries must remain small. Some truths are meant to be felt, not known. And some stories grow not from what survives, but from what chooses to disappear. The valley where seasons broke their promise. It begins with a hush the kind that settles over a land long accustomed to rhythm, only to find itself suddenly without one. In forgotten corners of the earth, Dara, there lies a valley shaped like a cradle, cupped gently between two ancient mountain spines. For centuries, it was a sanctuary of perfect timing. The rains arrived when they were summoned. The winds carried scent only when the soil asked for it. Flowers bloomed in colors that seemed almost rehearsed. But tonight, we wander through this place not as it was, but as it became. A valley where the seasons once broke their promise. The first light of evening drapes itself across cracked earth, filling every fracture with soft starlight. It is said the valley cracked in a single season, not violently, but sorrowfully, the way old parchment might tear at its edges. The ground beneath us is dry and still, but if we listen closely, there remains a tiny echo, almost like the memory of flowing water. We begin at the valley's entrance, where stone slabs rise like ancient guardians. Their surfaces are carved with circular markings, calendars, etched by hands now returned to dust. These engravings once dictated the valley's pulse. Each curve represented the moon's journey. Each spiral marked the subtle shift of wind. Elders would gather here at dawn, running their fingers gently along the grooves, reading the coming season like one might read a dream. Whispers tell us that the elders believed time itself lived here. They called the valley the breathing place. To them, seasons were not distant concepts, but living companions visiting, departing, returning. But then, one year, the pattern faltered. No one was prepared. No one expected the silence. It began subtly, the way stillness sometimes does. The rains paused, not by days or weeks, but by intention. The sky felt heavy, but offered nothing. Seeds placed in the soil lay waiting far longer than they should have, as though they hesitated, sensing something unseen. Farmers rose each dawn expecting the familiar perfume of moist earth, yet were greeted instead by the scent of dust, clean, dry, unsettling. Children wandered into fields where their parents once taught them the names of flowers, only to find stems brittle and colorless. And in the evenings, when the valley usually glowed with fireflies, only darkness gathered. Still, the people trusted the land. They had always trusted it. Perhaps, they said, the valley is merely taking breath. Weeks passed, then months, each stone marking on the ancient calendars grew colder to the touch, as if time itself had slipped out of rhythm. And yet, in a contradiction carried through centuries of retelling, some records from that year describe abundance. Tablet fragments speak of a harvest heavy enough to bow the backs of all who carried it. Murals in a nearby shrine depict overflowing baskets, colors bright and lively. Travelers' notes hint at feasts filled with laughter and lantern light. How can a valley be both starved and overflowing? The contradiction lingers like mist, soft but persistent. Scholars have debated it quietly in halls lined with dust and parchment. Some believe the murals were painted from hope, not truth. Others argue the famine was a tale exaggerated to warn future generations about pride or neglect or celestial imbalance. Yet the valley itself, this cracked, silent place, offers no explanation. We continue walking deeper, where terraces coil like sleeping serpents. Their once-perfect lines are now broken, softened by erosion and time. But even in decay, they hold a strange grace. You can almost imagine them as they once were, vibrant, warm, breathing with the rhythms of sun and moon. Here the wind carries echoes of ritual. It is said that long ago, elders stood on these terraces each dawn, raising polished stones toward the rising sun. The stones were star-marked, etched with tiny dots representing constellations. They believed these stones allowed them to listen more clearly to the shifting voice of the seasons. Further ahead, we find the remnants of a small pavilion, a wooden structure long collapsed, its beams half buried in soil. Children used to gather here, learning the first signs of spring, the color of dew, the scent of turning leaves, the call of early birds. Now only silence teaches here, and the lessons are different. Where memory fades, the pavilion seems to whisper. The valley's heart lies just beyond, a shallow basin bordered by ring-shaped stones. This place once held the first blooms of each season. Flowers grew here in patterns so predictable that families planned celebrations around them. Births, feasts, rare ceremonies, all timed to the moment the basin filled with color. But when the seasons broke their promise, the basin remained empty. No color, no fragrance, no gentle rustle of petals. Elders touched the soil and found it neither dead nor alive, simply waiting in a state between breaths. Some believed the sky was to blame. Others blamed the earth. Others whispered the valley had been wounded by a mistake too old to remember. But perhaps the truth is gentler, that nature sometimes shifts its rhythm not out of malice, but out of necessity. We pause here under a sky turning from violet to deep blue. Stars emerge one by one, soft and steady. The air cools. The cracked earth glows faintly, catching their light in its fractured lines. There's a quiet beauty to this place, a beauty born not of abundance, but of endurance. And perhaps that is the final lesson the valley carries, that the world is not meant to be constant, that even the most trusted rhythms can falter, that even promises whispered for generations can fade without warning. It is said that, years after the valley was abandoned, a traveler passed through during a late autumn night. When he awoke at dawn, he claimed the basin had filled with blooms not vibrant, not plentiful, but soft, pale flowers that seemed woven from moonlight. He told no one he believed it was forgiveness. Whether the story is true does not matter. What matters is the quiet hope it carries, a reminder that even broken rhythms can find their way back to harmony, if given enough time, enough silence, enough reverence. Tonight, as we leave the valley behind, the stars shimmer softly, as though remembering the seasons that once danced here. And in the distance, the mountains cradle the last breath of light, watching over a land still waiting for its promise to return. Perhaps it was never meant to be solved. Perhaps the valley continues to breathe in its own quiet way. Perhaps the broken rhythm is simply another form of music, one meant only for those who listen deeply, where memory fades and silence holds its own ancient truth. The orchard that grew without sunlight, they say. There was once a valley where daylight never fully arrived, a pale cradle between mountains, so steep and ancient that the sun could only brush its edges before vanishing again behind stone. Here, in the blue-gray quiet of the highlands, an orchard was said to have grown in a dim half-world, nourished not by sunlight, but by something older, something whispered. At the beginning of this tale, imagine yourself standing at the mouth of that secluded valley. The air tastes cool, almost metallic, as though the mountains themselves breathe out slow memories. Mist curls around your ankles like a shy companion. Far ahead lies a faint shimmer, the orchard, or what remains of it held in a perpetual dusk that never seems to lift. Long before the empire rose on the plains below, this valley belonged to a mountain people whose names are mentioned only in fragments. Their carvings remain, etched into narrow stones, leaning like tired elders along the pathway. In these carvings, no sun appears, only moons, overlapping like stacked petals, and trees whose branches resemble rivers flowing upward. From the first step, you understand, this place obeyed different seasons, different laws, different breath. The path leads you into the orchard slowly. There is no rush here. The very air moves in long, deliberate sighs. The trees stand tall but slender, their bark pale, almost silver, catching what little light the valley allows. Leaves rustle even without wind, as though stirred by some internal remembering. And the fruit, they hang like muted lanterns, their glow faint but steady, as if storing a story rather than sunlight. Legends say these trees were planted after a long winter that refused to end. The people, desperate and cold, gathered in the moonlight and whispered a plea to the old spirits of the mountain. They asked not for warmth, but for survival, for a harvest that could grow in darkness. Some say the spirits answered. Others say it was something else, something buried deep in the valley's bones, something that had been waiting for a voice. The orchard blossomed, not violently or suddenly, but in a quiet, steady unfolding, like frost melting in reverse. White flowers opened in the twilight, soft as breath on glass, and fruit grew in shadows where no fruit should have grown. For centuries, the mountain people tended the orchard with reverence. They harvested with silence. They carried the fruit in small woven baskets to the stone huts where families waited by dim hearths. That fruit, glowing faintly in the dark, became the heart of their survival. But the valley had its secrets, as every sacred place does. No outsider could remain there long. Visitors described strange dreams, ancient forests growing beneath the earth, rivers running upward into the sky, a woman woven of moonlight who mourned without sound. Some awoke with the taste of metal on their tongue, or with the sensation of cold roots brushing their feet. The mountain people understood these signs. They believed the orchard did not belong wholly to the living world. They performed rituals, gentle and unassuming, burning thin strands of herb, carrying bowls of cold water to the trees, placing smooth stones in quiet circles beneath the branches. The orchard listened. It always listened. Then the empire arrived, not with armies, but with curiosity. A group of imperial scholars, wandering in search of new agricultural methods, reached the valley by chance. They marveled at the strange light of the orchard, at fruit growing without the sun. They took samples, measurements, drawings, and without meaning harm, they stirred something that had slept. The valley began to change. The mist thickened. The trees dimmed, as though reluctant to share their light. The fruit grew smaller, its glow fading into a pale breath barely visible in the dusk. The mountain people felt the shift in their bones. Their elders whispered of a debt unpaid, a promise stretched thin. When the scholars returned to the capital with their findings, they never understood why their samples shriveled into dust. The fruit collapsed into dry husks. The seeds once so vibrant turned gray and hollow. They called it a failed experiment, a curiosity that wilted under scrutiny. But in the valley, the orchard dimmed further, withdrawing into itself like a creature curling inward to protect its heart. One night, as the mountains hummed with distant ice, the last of the glowing fruit dropped silently onto the moss. Old stories say the trees exhaled a single, collective release like a sigh of farewell. The mountain people gathered beneath the branches and listened to the silence. They knew what it meant. From that night onward, the orchard gave nothing. The people left offerings, bowls of water, strands of woven grass, even small pieces of carved stone. Nothing stirred. The valley remained a muted cradle of dimness, still beautiful, but no longer alive in the way it once had been. Years passed. The empire forgot the report filed by the scholars. The mountain people drifted into other valleys, carrying the memory of moonlit fruit in their stories. And the orchard remained, waiting not for sunlight, but perhaps for time, or for a gentler touch than the world could offer. If you walk there now, you might find remnants of the old harvest scattered like dreams that refused to fully leave. A silvered branch, a leaf that seems to faintly glow when twilight deepens, a stone carved with overlapping moons. The air will still feel cool, still metallic, still ancient. Stand there long enough, and you may sense what the mountain people once knew, that some harvests are not grown from sunlight nor from soil, but from memory itself, from the soft, unbroken longing of those who believed that even in darkness, life could still find a way to breathe. The orchard may one day stir again, perhaps when the valley feels safe, perhaps when the world learns to approach its mysteries with quiet rather than analysis, with reverence rather than hunger. But until then, it rests, a dream folded gently into a valley of dusk, a reminder that not all growth seeks the day. Some things bloom only in silence and fade just as quietly. The silent feast of the river kingdom. They say that every river carries a memory, but there was once a river that carried an entire kingdom's heartbeat, drifting softly along its current like a forgotten lullaby. The people who lived beside it believed the river did not simply pass through their land, but watched over it, guarding their sleep, their harvest, and their quiet secrets. On certain nights, if the moon rose thin and pale, they held a ritual that outsiders later called the silent feast. But those who belonged to the river knew it was not a feast at all, it was a remembering. To begin this tale, imagine yourself drifting along a slow-moving waterway at dusk. The world narrows to a soft palette of muted blues and dim golds. The river's surface is smooth as polished clay. Reeds sway with a rhythm that feels older than breath. On both banks stand small mud brick homes, their rounded forms blending into the earth as though grown rather than built. The air is thick with the scent of warm river mud and reed smoke. You feel as if you are floating not through place, but through time, a narrow corridor of memory, humming with stories thin as starlight. The River Kingdom, as later historians named it, existed far from the centers of empire. Its people were gentle in their ways, moving slowly, working softly, trusting the river's rhythm more than the shifting voice of the sky. Their harvests were modest, small grains, river herbs, pale root vegetables shaped by the silt. But their lives were rich in symbolism, layered with rituals that never raised their voices. Of these, none was more revered than the silent feast. It took place once a year, just before the river changed direction. For the river here was a strange one, flowing north for most of the year, then drifting south for a single lunar cycle, as if reconsidering its own journey. The people believed this reversal was the moment when the world paused to breathe between seasons. The silent feast honored that breath. Days before the ceremony, villagers collected reeds, weaving them into narrow mats washed by moonlit water. Elders ground river stones into smooth, flat bowls. Children followed the current, gathering pale flowers that grew only where the river whispered against the shore. These flowers, fragile as drowsy moth wings, wilted quickly in sunlight, so the children kept them shaded beneath cool cloth, carrying them with reverence. The preparation was slow, careful, quiet. Voices softened. Footsteps grew delicate, as though each movement might disturb the river's dreaming. When the night came, when the river paused between directions, the villagers gathered along the shore. Lanterns made of thin reeds glowed faintly, their firelight filtered into gentle amber haze. Each person carried something from the river: a stone, a bowl, a piece of driftwood, a small offering wrapped in plant fiber. They laid everything on long reed mats arranged parallel to the water. These mats stretched like narrow bridges between the village and the river's edge. But no one crossed. No one touched the water. The rule of the silent feast was simple: give the river what it remembers, not what you desire. There was no food, no music, no movement beyond breath, just offerings, small, delicate, symbolic, and silence. The silence was not empty, but full of longing, gratitude, and the soft ache of lives lived in quiet companionship with the water. Children sat with heads bowed, sensing without understanding. Elders closed their eyes, recalling the long seasons the river had carried them through. Stories say that during these moments, the river changed. Its surface became impossibly still, reflecting the villagers' lanterns like tiny moons. Some swore the river glowed from within, casting pale light upward, as though its depths held secrets rising to speak. Others claimed they heard something beneath the surface, not a voice, not exactly, but a layered vibration like stone grinding gently against stone. A sound of age, of patience, of watery remembrance. As the ceremony continued, each villager lifted an offering and placed it on the closest reed mat. They arranged them carefully in patterns passed from elder to child: spirals, lines, paired stones representing dual currents. And still, no one spoke. The silence deepened, becoming a presence of its own. The world beyond the river disappeared into darkness, leaving only the soft glow of lanterns and the faint shimmer of water. The silent feast was not meant for human ears. It was meant for the river. It was said that if the river accepted the offerings, the next harvest would be gentle and abundant. If it did not, the signs would show in the water's shifting moods: a sudden bitterness in the mud, a strange growth of reeds, an absence of fish. But the villagers did not fear rejection. They saw the river as a companion, sometimes tired, sometimes distant, always ancient. It was not a god. It was not a ruler. It was a listener, and they honored it by listening in return. Over time, however, the world beyond the valley changed. New kingdoms rose far downstream, kingdoms hungry for control. Engineers came, mapping the river with tools the villagers had never seen. They probed the banks, measured the currents, charted the river's reversal, as if capturing a wild creature within diagrams. The silent feast puzzled them. They saw villagers offering what seemed like nothing stones, driftwood, wilted petals. They wrote reports, calling it a ritual of symbolic scarcity, a custom born of poverty. They did not understand that the offerings were not gifts to the river, but reflections of it, pieces of its own memory returned, like a mirror gently handed back. When the new kingdoms redirected part of the river to feed their expanding fields, the villagers felt the change immediately. Their river slowed. Its reversal came later and lasted shorter. The sound beneath the water grew fainter, as though speaking through a veil of fatigue. The silent feast continued, but the night no longer hummed. The river did not glow. Lantern reflections broke more easily on ripples that should not have existed on that sacred night. Elders whispered that the river was grieving. One by one, harvests dwindled. Reeds grew brittle. The pale flowers became rare. Families began migrating away from the fading shore, carrying their rituals folded like old cloth within their memories. Eventually, only a small group remained keepers of tradition, hoping to coax the river back to its old rhythm. But the river had grown thin, quiet in a different way. Not sacred silence, but exhaustion. And when the night of reversal approached, the keepers prepared the last silent feast. It was smaller than ever. Only a handful of lanterns glowed. Only a few offerings lay upon the reed mats. But still, they kept each movement gentle, each breath intentional. They believed that even if the river no longer remembered them, they could still remember it. That night, something strange happened. The river did not reverse. Its current continued in the same direction, slow and steady, ignoring the moon's position for the first time in living memory. The lantern reflections wavered. The silence trembled. And the villagers understood this was farewell. They placed their last offerings upon the mats. Then, breaking centuries of tradition, they released their silence. A low murmur rose, not of sorrow, but gratitude. A final whisper carried into the night breeze. Thank you for holding us. The river flowed on, quiet and unchanged. Generations later, travelers passing through the abandoned valley find only remnants: crumbling huts softened by vines, worn reed mats buried in soil, bowls made of river stone lying beneath drifting sand. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is thin and pale, the water becomes still enough to reflect a faint amber glow that shouldn't exist. Some say it is memory. Some say it is the last echo of the silent feast. And some say the river, in its own timeless way, is still listening, waiting for a gentler age when offerings will return, not as gifts, but as reflections of old companionship. Until then, the river keeps its silence. And silence, after all, is a kind of feast. The field that dreamed in circles. There are places in the world where the earth seems to think, where fields breathe in slow rhythms and patterns, appear not by human hands, but as if shaped by the dreams of the land itself. One such field lay in a wind-softened plain, far beyond the empire's reach. A vast, gentle sweep of golden grasses that murmured like an ancient lullaby when the wind passed through. The people who lived nearby called it the dreaming field, not because they dreamed upon it, but because the field seemed to dream beneath them. To begin this tale, imagine yourself standing at the edge of that wide, quiet plain. The horizon is so open that it feels like a single, unbroken breath. The grasses sway in long, lyrical currents, not in the chaotic dance of weather, but in patterns that seem intentional. You draw closer, and that's when you see them. Circles, not carved, not stamped, not bent by tools but grown. Perfect rings where the grasses stand taller or shorter, or have shifted to a different hue entirely. Pale gold, deep amber, soft silver, muted green. They ripple gently across the field like overlapping echoes of forgotten whispers. The people of the plain did not disturb these circles. They walked around them, spoke softly near them, and harvested only the grasses that grew outside their boundaries. For they believed the circles were not markings, but memories. The elders said the field had begun dreaming long before their grandparents were born. Some claimed it dreamed of the sky, others of ancient animals whose hoofbeats once rolled like storms across the plain. A few whispered it dreamed of something deeper, something buried beneath the soil, as old as the wind itself. In the early years, the circles appeared rarely a single ring here, a faint pattern there. But as time passed, they multiplied. Some overlapped like layered moons, others connected to form spirals, gently curving labyrinths of living grass. And then came the first night of the glowing. It happened near midsummer. The air had grown heavy with heat, the grasses warm to the touch. Villagers sat outside their small huts, breathing with the stars. Then a child noticed it faint at first, like a subtle shimmer. The circles were glowing, not with fire, not with magic, but with a soft, bioluminescent breath, as if the field had awakened to its own dreaming. The glow pulsed, slowly, steadily, a rhythm like a heartbeat, or like the rise and fall of distant waves. The villagers gathered at the edge of the field, unwilling to step closer, afraid to disturb the dream. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders, not to bring them nearer, but to let them see more without moving onto the sacred ground. Some cried softly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming beauty of it. A living field breathing light into the night. From that season onward, the circles glowed at unexpected times. During the winter solstice moon, before great storms, on nights when no wind stirred, but the air felt thick with listening. Scholars from distant regions heard rumors of the dreaming field and traveled to see it. They tried to measure the circles, to map them, to understand their rhythm, but the circles behaved differently whenever they were watched. Patterns that had been clear the day before appeared scattered or shifted by dawn. The scholars insisted the villagers were altering the field, or that the stories were exaggerated. But the villagers knew better. They had never touched the circles. The field dreamed its own dreams. Over time, those who tended the land noticed something else. The grasses inside the circles were always healthier. They grew with a gentle resilience, swaying with softer movements, as though held by some invisible warmth beneath the soil. So the villagers began leaving offerings, very small ones, barely noticeable to anyone else. A smooth stone, a handful of seeds, a piece of woven grass twisted into a ring. Offerings placed just outside the circle's edges, never within. Their intention was simple, to thank the field for dreaming. But as years passed, storms grew stronger. The earth trembled in distant regions. Great herds migrated away, disrupting cycles older than memory. The field began to change. The circles shifted more quickly, appearing in new places overnight. Some glowed brighter than before, while others dimmed and disappeared entirely. Then came the season of the falling. For the first time in generations, the grasses inside several circles collapsed, not with sickness, but as though pressed down by something unseen. Perfect spirals formed, curving inward toward invisible centers. Patterns grew increasingly complex, as if the field were dreaming urgently, restlessly. Villagers watched with aching hearts. The field was speaking, they said, but no one knew how to listen. When the scholars returned, they declared the spirals evidence of trickery. They accused villagers of fabricating the patterns. They marked the circles with stakes, trampled the grasses in narrow search grids, sketched rigid diagrams where fluid motion belonged. The field dimmed. It felt as if the land itself pulled inward, retreating from the intrusion. The grasses lost their shimmer, their glow stopped entirely. The villagers tried to soothe the field. They removed the stakes. They brushed the grasses gently. They sat in silent circles near the edge at dusk, hoping their quiet presence would ease whatever sorrow had taken root beneath the soil. Seasons passed. The circles returned faint, fragile, like memories fading back into the world after a long silence. They no longer glowed, but they still grew. The elders said the field was still dreaming, only softer now, more cautiously, as if uncertain whether the world would allow its dreaming to continue. Even today, the dreaming field remains. The spirals are faint, the rings subtle, but on certain nights, if the wind pauses, if the sky holds its breath, if you stand quietly at the field's edge and listen not with your ears, but with your whole being, you might feel something. A slow pulse beneath the soil, a whisper of patterns unseen, a memory rising from the earth's quiet heart. For some places do not dream of us, they dream through us. And some fields, in the long patience of time, continue to shape their silent circles not for spectacle, but for the deep, unseen rhythm of the world. The temple of the vanishing grains, they say. There once stood a temple where the wind refused to speak. A sanctuary shaped not from gold or marble, but from quiet grains and the memory of harvests older than any empire's first breath. Travelers who stumbled upon its ruins whispered that the air felt different there, soft, almost listening, as if something once sacred had been carried away, leaving only its outline behind. Tonight, we drift toward that forgotten sanctuary, letting the dark cradle us as we walk along a dying horizon. The moon hangs thin as a blade of silver grass, illuminating a lonely valley where shadows shiver like pages of an unwritten prayer. The earth here is pale, powdered, and strangely fragrant, as though it remembers the scent of offerings long gone. And at the valley's center lies the temple, its skeletal pillars leaning like elders remembering too much. The journey begins with a single question, drifting like dust through the air. What kind of grain was worshipped so deeply that an entire temple was raised in its honor, and then mysteriously erased from the world? The entrance is carved into the ground itself, descending as if into the belly of a quiet storm. Each step is edged with symbols, small spirals, crescent shapes, and branching lines like falling seeds. Your fingers trace their soft depressions, and you feel the faintest warmth, as if the stones have kept the echo of ancient hands. Inside, the air grows colder, filled with a thin, shimmering hush. It is not silence exactly, but something suspended between silence and memory. Lamps once hung from the ceiling, their hooks remain, and you can almost imagine the flicker of flame dancing like pollen caught in low sunlight. The floor is covered in a fine powder that drifts lightly when you breathe. Grain dust, perhaps, or the last offering left unclaimed. Here, in the first chamber, the walls are carved with immense sheaves of grain rising like pillars of moonlight. Not wheat, not barley. Something longer, smoother, almost silky in its shape. A luminous crop that does not match anything grown today. Its name has vanished, but its presence lingers like a ghost made from harvest dreams. Priests once gathered here, brushing the grains with reverent palms, whispering blessings into the soft, fertile shadows. As you walk deeper, a long corridor opens like a throat of stone, leading toward the sacred heart of the temple. The carvings become denser, depicting processions of figures with lowered heads, each carrying bowls filled with the mysterious grain. Their robes fall like flowing water, their steps appear light, nearly weightless. It feels less like ceremony and more like exhalation, a ritual woven of breath and quiet devotion. At the end of the corridor lies the sanctum of seeds. It is vast. The ceiling rises into darkness, giving the impression of being outdoors beneath a midnight sky. The floor dips slightly, forming a wide basin where offerings were once placed. Around the edges are niches carved with astonishing precision. Each once held a clay vessel, but now only empty circles remain, like eyes without their stars. In the center stands an altar made of a single piece of stone that glows faintly warm under your hand. A shallow bowl is carved into its surface. Inside the bowl, there is nothing, no grains, no dust, not even residue. It is as if whatever once rested there was removed with supernatural gentleness, leaving no trace. And yet, a faint shimmer hangs in the air above the bowl. You watch as the shimmer flickers, dims, returns, a vibration soft as a breath. You close your eyes, and in that stillness, you feel the temple almost breathe with you. When you inhale, the air tastes faintly sweet like warm bread, or fields brushing the skin during harvest season. A taste impossible here, in a dead valley beneath a thin moon. The temple remembers. The carvings across the walls seem to shift subtly in the corner of your vision, as if illuminated by ghost lamps. You begin to sense the shape of the story. This temple protected a grain believed to be a gift, not from gods, but from the sky itself. Legends speak of a falling star landing in a field, igniting the soil with strange warmth. From that radiant earth grew a crop unlike any other unearthly in texture, glimmering faintly under starlight, capable of feeding entire kingdoms from just a handful of seeds. It became a sacred harvest, a symbol of peace, of sustenance, of cosmic blessing. Under its light, kings negotiated peace treaties, nomadic tribes settled, and warring clans set down their blades for a season of harmony. The grain held the empire together like a soft thread of silver weaving through its people's hearts. So why did it vanish? You sense the answer hiding somewhere beyond the chamber. Another passage waits behind a half-collapsed archway. Dust falls as you gently push through, entering a smaller room filled with broken pottery. Shards glisten like tiny moons scattered across the floor. On the walls, the carvings shift abruptly in toned figures clutching empty bowls. Shadows of famine spreading like dark waves, priests looking skyward in despair. The star grains stopped growing, not gradually, but suddenly, in a single season. Fields that once shimmered with silver stalks sprouted nothing but dry, brittle stems. Farmers knelt in disbelief. Priests searched for signs in the night sky. Kings clutched their ledgers with trembling hands. Entire granaries built to store the sacred crop stood hollow, filled only with dust. The empire's unity, so long stitched by this celestial gift, began to loosen like threads pulled from an old cloth. And so, the priests enacted the final ritual. They sealed the remaining seeds in sacred vessels and brought them to this temple. They prayed, wept, and waited, believing the sky would rekindle the soil's blessing. But the seeds never sprouted. Some say they dissolved into dust the moment they were placed upon the altar. Others say they faded like moonlight at dawn. A softer tale whispers that the seeds returned to the sky. Whatever the truth, this temple became a monument to disappearance. You move deeper still, finding a final chamber small, circular, and eerily empty. No carvings, no relics, only a faint depression in the floor, as if something once rested there. You kneel and run your hand across the stone. It feels warm, then cold, then warm again, like a heartbeat fading. A whisper moves through the room, not spoken, but sensed. Some gifts are never meant to be kept. Some harvests remain only long enough to turn the world by a single breath. When you step outside the temple, dawn is still far away. The moon has lowered, its pale light tracing the sand like spilled silver. Yet, strangely, the valley feels fuller than before, softened by something unspoken. The temple behind you seems less like a ruin and more like an echo suspended between worlds. You walk away slowly, knowing the sacred grain may be gone, but its memory still nourishes the quiet corners of the earth. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the veil of sleep, a seed still waits. A seed that vanishes only to be found again in dreams. Sky Almanac of the Forgotten Farmers. They say the earliest farmers did not read the soil. First, they read the sky. Long before empires carved their names into stone, before kings measured time with bronze and shadow, there existed a small, unrecorded community hidden among the low, rolling plains. These people believed that every harvest was written not on the earth, but in the heavens. The sky was their book, their prophecy, their almanac, and they read it with a reverence that felt more like prayer than study. Tonight, we drift back to their quiet world, letting sleep guide our steps through grass that bends like whispered secrets. The air carries a faint scent of sun-warmed stalks and evening dew. Fireflies hover like tiny stars that have momentarily fallen to rest among the reeds. And in the distance, atop a gentle hill, stands an object that glows almost imperceptibly under the moon's pale breath. It is a great stone disk, part calendar, part compass, part memory. The forgotten farmers carved it with hands that knew the shape of patience better than any dynasty that came after them. Tonight, the soft dark invites us closer. The disk lies half buried, as though dreaming. Its edges are smooth, worn by centuries of wind and quiet rain. Along its circumference, small indentations form a delicate pattern, tiny wells holding shadows instead of water. When the moonlight touches them, they shine like droplets of silver ink. The opening question arrives gently, like the rustle of a field settling for the night. What secrets did these early farmers see in the heavens that the rest of the world forgot? Around the disk, the earth dips gracefully, forming a natural bowl. This space would fill with people in ancient days, elders, children, farmers with soil still clinging to their palms. They gathered here when the sky deepened into velvet blue and the first stars began to spark awake. their faces tilted upward, reflecting constellations that shimmered with soft certainty. Above them stretched a sky so clear it seemed almost liquid, and within that sky, patterns unfurled, patterns that the farmers believed mirrored the cycles of the land. When a certain cluster of stars grew brighter, they prepared the fields. When another shifted slightly toward the horizon, they harvested. The moon's path told them when to rest. The sun's glow told them when to wander. But the disk was more than a tool. It was an offering. Every symbol etched into its surface mirrored a constellation. Spirals for the moon's long breath, concentric circles for the sun's slow turning, lines like gentle waves for the winds that guided seeds across the plains. Carvings of tiny dots represented stars that shimmered only once every few decades, stars the farmers treated as omens of deep change. The Sky Almanac was not built quickly. It grew layer by layer, mark by mark, like a field tended over an entire lifetime. Each generation added something, a line, a hollow, a faint curve, until the disk held the collective memory of centuries. It became their map of time, their echo of the universe. And yet, the disk also held a prophecy, one that farmers whispered only in the soft hours before dawn. They believed a year would come when the stars would shift ever so slightly out of pattern. A gentle misalignment, sign that the earth was about to change in a way no plow could prepare for. Not disaster, not doom, something quieter, something like a breath being held. Some say that night arrived. You step back and imagine this very hill long ago, filled with murmurs and lamplight. The farmers stand around the disk, their silhouettes framed by a rising moon. Their eyes trace the sky's tapestry as a faint tension ripples through the constellations, subtle but unmistakable. A star that should gleam bright is dimmer than expected. Another seems to wander a fraction outside its ancient path. It is enough. The farmers kneel, touching their foreheads to the ground. They whisper a prayer into the soil, not in fear, but in acceptance. They believed that when the heavens changed, they too must change, just as crops turn from seed to sprout to grain. In the days that followed, something even stranger happened. The farmers disappeared, not all at once, but gradually, like mist drifting away with dawn. Their dwellings were left intact, their fields still fertile, their tools placed carefully where they belonged. There are no signs of flight or conflict, no signs of sickness, no signs of abandonment, only absence, and the disk remained. Some think they followed the stars to new lands. Others believe they retreated into the deep woods, choosing to live where the sky could speak to them without interruption. A few whisper that they became like the constellations. They studied stories in motion, slipping into the realm between myth and memory. You sit beside the disk, running your hand across its cool surface. The carved stars feel soft beneath your fingertips, like smoothing the petals of a nocturnal flower. A breeze drifts gently over the hill, carrying the scent of distant rain. Then something stirs. the moon emerges from behind a thin veil of clouds, and the disk brightens in a sudden but delicate glow. Light fills the tiny carved wells, creating the illusion of a miniature night sky resting at your feet. Slowly, carefully, the patterns of carved stars align with the real constellations above. You watch, breath quiet, heart slow. In that moment, you feel a connection between earth and sky, so steady it feels like the world is exhaling. The disk is not merely a record, it is a mirror, an echo, a gentle reminder that the land listens to the heavens in ways we have forgotten. A soft realization settles into your mind like a falling seed. Perhaps the farmers did not vanish. Perhaps they simply fulfilled their prophecy. They became part of the cycle they so deeply understood. As the light fades, the carvings return to their subtle pallor. The sky darkens once more into its endless hush. The hill feels unchanged, yet something hangs in the air, a warmth, a vibration, a feeling like standing at the threshold of an unspoken truth. You rise slowly, letting the breeze brush through your clothes like an old friend's hand. The world seems larger now, more open, as though every star above holds a memory of someone who once read its story with such care. As you walk back down the hill, you glance over your shoulder one last time. The disk lies quiet again, a soft halo of moonlight draped across its ancient face. It does not need to speak. It remembers. And perhaps tonight, beneath this gentle sky, it remembers you too. The garden at the edge of memory. They say there is a garden that appears only when the world becomes quiet enough to remember itself. A place where the boundary between what was and what was dreamed dissolves like mist curled at sunrise. No map marks its location. No chronicle records its name. And yet, travelers across centuries have whispered of stumbling upon it, usually in moments when they felt most lost or most ready to listen. Tonight, as the veil of sleep drapes softly across your thoughts, we drift toward that elusive sanctuary. The air around us thickens with the scent of wet leaves and cooling earth, though no forest is visible yet. A hush settles deeper than silence, like the earth holding its breath for just one heartbeat longer. Then, as if emerging from the folds of a half-remembered childhood dream, the path appears. It is narrow, woven of pale soil and threads of moonlight, winding toward a faint glow. The trees along the path lean inward, branches arching together like old companions, sharing a quiet confidence. Their leaves shimmer faintly, despite the absence of wind. They seem to beckon. At the end of this path lies a gate, not a grand gate of metal or stone, but a simple archway woven from vines, tender, fragile, alive. Tiny blossoms cling to it, pulsing with a soft luminosity, like breathing lanterns. Beyond the arch, the garden opens in a wide curve, shaped like an embrace. The opening question arises gently, as if the night asks it with you. How can a garden hold memories that do not belong to any one person, but to the world itself. You step through the arch. The moment your foot touches the soil, a subtle warmth rises through you, not heat, but recognition. The garden greets you without words. It is unlike any garden tended by human hands. No rows, no boundaries, no cultivation. Everything grows in a soft, natural harmony. Flowers unfurl with slow grace, as if waking from a long rest. Vines cascade from ancient stonework that has long since surrendered its shape to moss. Trees with silvered bark stretch their branches gently toward the sky, though their leaves remain heavy with dew despite the dry night. Everywhere, a glow lingers, not bright, not artificial, a quiet luminescence, as though the plants themselves carry memories of sunlight long gone. The air is warm and cool at once, filled with the earthy sweetness of ancient soil. You walk deeper. At your side, a row of small white flowers opens as you pass, their petals turning toward you in slow devotion. Farther ahead, a fountain trickles, the water so still it reflects the stars like polished obsidian. And around the fountain grow plants that should not exist in the same climate or the same world. Mountain herbs beside desert blooms, Arctic moss beside tropical vines, a tapestry woven from impossible threads. Each plant seems to hold a whisper, a memory. The first one brushes against your fingers, a delicate vine curling like a forgotten melody. Instantly, a scene blooms behind your closed eyes, a field in an ancient kingdom, children scattering seeds with laughter, a king watching with gentle pride, a memory that is not yours, yet feels strangely familiar. You open your eyes, breath soft. Another flower leans toward you, a deep violet bloom whose petals shimmer like twilight. When you touch it lightly, a new memory rises. An old woman tending her small garden on a distant island, singing a lullaby older than her people's written language. Her voice trembles, but she smiles. Every plant here contains a fragment of human experience. Not individuals, not stories, but emotions distilled into living form: joy, sorrow, hope, longing, all blooming quietly at the edge of the world. As you move deeper still, the garden shifts subtly. Colors darken, shadows lengthen. The air grows thicker, richer, as if carrying the echoes of forgotten epics. In one corner, a tree stands alone, its trunk twisted into a spiral, branches shaped like reaching hands. Its roots glow faintly, tracing patterns like constellations across the soil. You touch its bark. A long breath exhales from the earth, and a heavier memory pours through you, not a single moment, but an entire century of drought and migration, of people walking across unknown lands in search of water and mercy. You feel their hope and exhaustion at once. You release the tree gently, bowing your head. Some memories are heavier than stone. Near the garden's center lies a pool, circular still, rimmed by stones etched with soft, swirling patterns. The water is so clear it seems like a second sky. But when you look into it, you do not see your reflection. You see the past, Unfamiliar lands, unfamiliar people, moving across the surface like shadows cast from worlds you've never walked. A caravan crossing a desert under stars. A lone figure writing on clay tablets beside a river. A group of farmers planting seeds in the early dawn. These images drift like smoke across the water, shifting, dissolving, returning. The pool does not show personal memories. It shows moments humanity has forgotten, but the earth has not. Moments too quiet for history books to keep. And then the pool darkens. A soft ripple, a shift. You lean closer, not out of fear, but curiosity. The image forming now is quieter still. A pair of hands, ageless, anonymous, planting a single seed into the soil. The gesture is simple, almost ritualistic. The hands pause, pressing gently, tenderly. The pool brightens, and the memory fades. As you stand, a soft breeze moves through the garden for the first time. Leaves tremble, blossoms sway. It feels like a sigh of contentment, the garden acknowledging your presence. Every step now feels like walking within an unspoken story. At last, the path leads you to the farthest end of the garden, the boundary where the world seems to blur, blending into a soft haze. Here stands a final structure, a single stone bench draped in moss and vine. It feels ancient, sacred, as if countless travelers rested here to release their burdens. You sit. The garden quiets around you. Even the air grows still. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of the stone seep into your palms. And then you feel it gentle, subtle, unmistakable. A memory rising not from the plants, not from the soil, but from the garden itself. It is the memory of being forgotten. This place has lived for ages, appearing only when the world has grown too loud and then forgotten how to listen. It has watched empires rise, crumble, and fade into dust. It has cradled the echoes of mothers singing, of children planting seeds, of wanderers crying softly into the night. It has held sorrow and joy without judgment, and it remembers. But what it remembers most is solitude, the loneliness of being a sanctuary rarely found, the melancholy of holding memories that no longer belong to anyone living. The garden does not speak, yet its silence trembles with meaning. You place your hand on the stone bench, offering a silent promise. You are not forgotten. A warmth spreads beneath your palm, and the air shimmers faintly. Leaves glow brighter, flowers lift their heads. The pool ripples once without wind. The entire garden exhales. Then slowly, softly, it begins to fade. The path dissolves into mist. The trees waver like candle flames. The blossoms fold inward. The pool dims until it becomes part of the earth again. And the archway of vines loses its glow, becoming just darkness framed by shadows. You stand, the last piece of the garden dissolving into twilight behind you. A faint scent of blossoms lingers on your hands. A memory not your own lingers in your heart. As the world returns, as the landscape becomes familiar once more, one truth settles within you. Some gardens bloom only in the mind. Some memories grow only in silence. And some places exist not to be found, but to remind us that we too are part of the earth's long dream. The last ember of the hearth keepers it is said that in the furthest reaches of the old valleys, in a settlement now reduced to whispers and stones, there once stood a communal hearth that never truly went dark. Travelers who passed through at dusk described a faint warmth rising from its ash, even when no flame burned within it, as though some ancient breath lingered there, hidden beneath the silence. And those who lived in that place, few as they were, believed that this hearth was the oldest memory their people possessed, older than the fields, older than the carved markers that watched over their borders, older even than the weathered songs they sang when moonlight brushed softly across their roofs. Tonight, as we step quietly into this fading memory, the hearth sits before us. Its stones are cracked, veiled in a thin mantle of dust. The ashes within it are pale, almost silver in tone, as if touched by moonlight alone. Yet beneath the stillness, beneath the cooling air and fallen embers, there is the faintest trace of warmth. A single ember, so small that even the wind seems uncertain whether to feed it or ignore it, rests deep within the bed of ash. Some believe that this ember is not a remnant of fire at all, but the last heartbeat of a forgotten guild, the Hearth Keepers, who once tended the flame with reverence, with ritual, with a devotion passed through generations. Whispers tell us that the Hearth Keepers were not merely custodians of fire. They were guardians of seasons, interpreters of warmth, keepers of the breath that moved through fields and orchards. When the year leaned toward harvest, it was they who lit the ceremonial flame at the first crack of dawn. Villagers would gather slowly around it, breaths rising in soft clouds, their faces warmed by the glow. Offerings were placed gently upon the embers, small bundles of grain, woven herbs, and carved tokens carrying hopes or blessings. The rituals were not grand, nor were they meant to stir awe. They were quiet, rhythmic acts, grounded in the belief that every harvest needed a guiding light, a whisper of fire to lead it safely from seedling to storehouse. In forgotten corners of the world, they say that this flame could sense the intention of those who approached it. A humble heart brought warmth, a greedy one brought only smoke. Whether this was truth or embellishment woven by fading memory, none can say. But in the valley, these stories shaped the lives of those who tended the fields. Each season began beside that hearth, with soft chanting that drifted like early morning mist. Children sat close enough to feel the heat on their cheeks, while elders murmured lines from ancestral prayers. The air was gentle, almost sacred, and the fire flickered with a steady, calming rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the village itself. Time, however, has a way of loosening the threads that bind a tradition. Some seasons arrived with rains too heavy, drowning the fields. Others came with winds so harsh they stripped the soil bare. With every uncertain turn, some villagers began to question the rituals. They whispered that the fire had grown weaker, that perhaps the hearth keepers were losing their touch, or that the gods of warmth had drifted elsewhere. Others claimed the flame had grown too strong, too hungry, consuming the offerings in a single breath. The village began to fracture, not with anger, but with quiet doubt, like a fabric slowly tearing under its own weight. It is during these mismatched memories that the final season of the hearth keepers took shape. Some say the last fire failed to ignite. They speak of a morning when the keepers gathered at dawn, the wood stacked neatly, the offerings placed with familiar care, but no spark would take. The flint gave no light. The breath of the keepers stirred only cold ash. The villagers waited as the sun climbed the sky, watched as the keepers knelt in silence, and felt an unease settle over them, as if the world had lost a ritual too ancient to understand. Yet others tell a different story. They insist the final fire did ignite so brilliantly, so fiercely, that it burned through the day and deep into the night, brighter than any flame before it. It roared with an unnatural intensity, sending sparks into the darkened sky. Some say it was a blessing too strong to bear. Others, that it was a warning of change. Those who believe this version claim the hearth keepers stood motionless before it, watching as the flame consumed everything it touched until only a crater of glowing embers remained. And then there are softer voices, those who remember a gentler ending. They say the final flame flickered in a way no one had seen before, slow, hesitant, as if aware of its own mortality. It rose and fell like a breath fading into sleep. The keepers, recognizing the shift, placed their palms over their hearts and bowed in unison. The villagers followed, filling the air with whispered gratitude. When the fire finally dimmed, it did so without drama, without fear, only quiet acceptance. A flame that had guided countless seasons simply drifted into memory, leaving behind a single ember that glowed for one last night before sinking beneath its own ashes. Which of these endings is true? Beneath the silence, only the stones of the hearth remember. Tonight, as we linger beside the hearth, the ruined valley around us feels suspended in time. The wind carries faint echoes of old chants. The moonlight strokes the stones with a softness that feels deliberate, almost tender. In this stillness, the ember within the ash glows again, not with heat, but with memory. It invites us to imagine the warmth that once gathered families together, the fragile hope they placed upon the flame, the comfort it offered in seasons of uncertainty. Perhaps the hearth keepers did not fail. Perhaps they simply reached the natural close of a tradition too old to continue. Or perhaps the ember before us is a message that even forgotten rituals leave traces, tiny sparks that refuse to vanish completely, lingering in the folds of time like a breath waiting to be noticed. Where memory fades, warmth often remains. Some believe that the hearth's last ember carries the final blessing of the hearth keepers. Others think it holds only silence. Yet as we sit with it, as the night deepens and the valley softens into shadow, the ember becomes something else, a reminder that every sacred flame, no matter how cherished, eventually rests. But its rest is not an ending. It is simply a quiet turning, a gentle surrender, a glow that invites the next generation to remember, not recreate. And so, the chapter closes with this image: a single ember, cradled in the ruins of a hearth that once guided a whole valley. Its light is faint, barely visible beneath the ash. But still it glows. Still it whispers. Still it warms the silence just enough to remind us that nothing sacred ever truly disappears. It only softens into the story of what once was. The empire's quietest turning, it is said that every empire keeps two histories, one carved proudly into stone, and another written quietly in the shadows, recorded only in the smallest changes, the faintest shifts, the moments too subtle to notice until they have already passed. Tonight, we open a door into that second history, the soft, uncertain one, where the turning of a single season shaped the fate of an entire realm without shouting, without warning, without even leaving a clear trace. The chapter begins in a dim chamber lit by a single wavering candle. The flame bends with each breath of the scribe who sits before it, his brush moving slowly across parchment. Dust lies thick upon the shelves around him, softening the edges of rolled scrolls and cracked bindings. The air tastes of age, dry, quiet, and patient. Here, beneath the silence of the archive, he records what he believes may be the last season before a transformation no one yet understands. His candle flickers, as though unsure whether it belongs to the present moment or to the past he is capturing. Whispers tell us that this room once held the empire's deepest secrets, records of tides, harvest cycles, star charts, temple offerings, and the subtle shifts in nature that guided the council's decisions. Beneath the silence, some say the shelves themselves murmured when touched, as if the scrolls carried memory like breath. Whether true or imagined, the archivists believed the chamber to be alive in its own way, an ocean of ink and dust, holding more truths than any throne ever could. As the scribe writes, he pauses often, dipping his brush into a shallow stone, well filled with ink the color of storm clouds. He is not recording a war, nor a decree, nor a coronation. Instead, he documents something far gentler, almost imperceptible. The final season before a harvest that would never return. To him, the details feel fragile, uncertain. Was it truly the last? Or would it simply sleep and rise again? Even he does not know. But he writes because he feels the quiet shift moving through the air, the way one senses the first cool morning of autumn, a change without proclamation. On one scroll, he notes a surplus. In neat, careful strokes, he describes storehouses filled beyond expectation. He describes the relief of farmers whose granaries overflowed like riverbanks in spring. He writes of festivals held beneath pale lantern light, of families laughing, of merchants offering sweet bread in the open squares. That season, by his account, was one of warmth and plenty. Yet, when he reaches for another scroll, an older one, bound with fraying twine, he finds a contradiction. It speaks of scarcity, of fields cracked under relentless sun, of workers kneeling in dust as their crops thinned into brittle strands. This scroll feels heavy in his hands, as though burdened by memory. His candle flickers again, casting trembling shadows across both documents, and for a moment the scribe wonders which truth is real. But he records them both, because history rarely offers a single story. Further along the shelves, temple inscriptions provide yet another account. They praise a crop no longer grown, no longer spoken of except in ritual verse. They describe offerings shaped from its grain, placed upon altars beneath carved symbols marked by the moon. These inscriptions speak of divine favor, of blessings tied to a plant whose absence now feels like a missing heartbeat. The scribe reads each line slowly, tracing the grooves with his fingertips, imagining the priests who once chanted them in echoing halls. Where memory fades, the ink remains. As he continues his work, the chamber seems to deepen around him. The farther he reads, the more the past feels like a winding corridor, one marked by mismatched recollections, half-remembered seasons, and quiet contradictions. There is no clarity, no single thread that explains why the harvest disappeared. Only subtle hints, like footprints washed thin by the tide. Some say the fields simply changed, shifting with the climate's breath. Others say the soil lost its secret strength. A few whisper of choices made by those in power, decisions recorded nowhere, sealed behind palace doors. And there are voices, softer still, that claim the crop vanished of its own accord, as though it had fulfilled its purpose and withdrawn into time. None of these versions can be proven, yet the scribe records them all, letting each possibility settle onto parchment with equal gentleness. His candle leans left, then right, as though listening. Beyond the archive walls, the empire carries on. Markets buzz softly under morning mist. Traders move along riverbanks where reeds sway in silver light. In distant villages, elders tell stories that drift between fact and fable. Most citizens remain unaware of any turning at all. They feel only small shifts, prices that rise or fall unpredictably, seasons that seem slightly different from the last, wines that carry unfamiliar unfamiliar sense. They do not yet know that their lives have entered a new arc, shaped not by war or decree, but by the fading of something so ordinary that it seemed eternal. Perhaps this is why the shift runs so quietly beneath the surface. When a tradition ends in fire or conflict, its memory burns bright. But when it ends with a gentle exhale, with a harvest that simply does not return, it dissolves into the folds of time, almost unnoticed. And so the scribe writes on. He moves from scroll to scroll, collecting contradictions like fragile artifacts. Some documents are smudged beyond recognition, as if touched by damp seasons long past. Others shine with careful calligraphy, preserved by pride or hope. A few contain only fragments, half a sentence, a faded sketch of a grain head, a tally with numbers that no longer match any known measure. These fragments, though incomplete, feel the most honest. They carry the tremble of a world in transition. In one especially old scroll, the scribe finds a passage describing the empire's dependence on the lost harvest. It claims that this crop fed not only bodies, but spirits, that its presence in the fields brought a sense of balance, a rhythm to the year. It suggests that without it, the empire would shift, subtly but unmistakably, as though a gear within its great machinery had gone missing. The scribe copies this passage with slow reverence. His candle burns lower, melting into a pool of amber wax. The light grows softer, golden, enveloping the chamber in a gentle haze. Through it, the shelves seem endless, rising into shadow. He wonders how many stories lie hidden here, how many quiet turnings shaped the empire long before he lived. How many more will unfold after he is gone? By the time he reaches the final sheet, the candle is scarcely more than a trembling star. He writes the last lines with a careful, fading hand. Not every turning announces itself. Some arrive like dusk, inevitable, unnoticed, and complete only when the final light dissolves. He lays down his brush. The chamber stills. Dust settles in the glow, drifting like forgotten snow. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once, then falls silent. It is said that, in the centuries afterward, scholars searched for records explaining the lost harvest. They found nothing definitive. Some scrolls contradicted others. Many had been lost entirely. Over time, the disappearance became more myth than fact. A footnote in songs, a quiet echo in the empire's long history. Yet those who listened closely, those who wandered the archives by candlelight, who felt the weight of forgotten scrolls, believed that the shift had indeed happened, and that it had changed the empire in ways too gentle to measure. For fate often turns not with thunder, but with silence. And so this chapter closes the way the empire changed, softly, without resolution. We leave the scribe in his chamber, the candle now dim, the ink drying on his final page. Outside, the night breathes. The stars drift overhead. And somewhere in the fields, empty now of the harvest that once defined them, the wind moves through grass that has learned to grow differently. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. But tonight, we carry with us the understanding that history moves in many ways, and sometimes its quietest turnings shape the world the most.